Hey guys, tonight we're sailing straight into a myth that starts off so casual, so sun-drenched and peaceful. You'd never guess it ends with dolphins that used to be pirates. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted a quiet afternoon on the coast, bare feet in warm sand, a bit of salty air, maybe some local wine, and an excuse to pretend I was on some ancient vacation in Mykonos. The sky was a lazy blue. The waves whispered like they were trying not to wake someone. I picked a sun-warmed rock, sat down, and unscrewed my wine flask. That's when I saw it. Out on the water, something was moving. At first, I thought it was just a fishing boat, maybe one of those weathered little vessels with net bundles and sleepy old men aboard. But as it came closer, I realized no. The thing looked like it had drifted straight out of a painting. The sails were torn at the corners, the hull sun-bleached and chipped like old parchment. It made no sound as it approached. I'm serious. No splash, no creak. It just appeared like fog with a rudder. And then came the shouting. "Hey, you. Yes, you with the flask. Come aboard, you've got the vibe," a voice called out. I blinked. A group of men stood on the deck, waving cheerfully like I was a long-lost cousin showing up at their wine party. So yeah, I got up, brushed the sand off my legs, and walked toward the boat. You know those moments when your brain says bad idea, but your feet go, what's the worst that could happen? This was one of those. Next thing I knew, I was on the deck, surrounded by what I can only describe as aggressively cheerful drifters. One had a lute, one had a chicken, one had the eyes of someone who drinks for breakfast and hasn't lost a bet in 15 years. "Don't worry," one of them said, clapping me on the back. "We're not pirates. We're free sailors." He said it like he was describing a spiritual retreat. I wasn't exactly reassured. They handed me a cup, someone offered olives, and somewhere behind me, someone was either singing or hiccuping to a rhythm only he could hear. It was chaos, but the kind with a weirdly contagious charm, like if a wine cellar decided to start a jazz band. But the one who caught my attention wasn't loud. He didn't sing or shout or even smile. He sat alone at the back of the ship, just still. His robe was spotless, which was odd considering everyone else looked like they'd been wrestling goats in a vineyard. His hair didn't move, even in the breeze. And there was a bronze jug by his side, steam curling lazily from a spout. People moved around him like he was sacred furniture. They nodded respectfully, even mid-drunken rant, but no one touched him. And he just watched. He never looked directly at me. But I swear I could feel it, that low, humming awareness. Like he didn't need to move his eyes to know everything I was thinking. I try not to stare, of course. I casually turn away, pretending to enjoy the sea view while very much rethinking my life choices. Here's the thing. There's this long-standing argument among historians, still unresolved, by the way, about who Dionysus really was. Some say he wasn't originally Greek. Some say he wasn't even a god to begin with, just a human who elevated, or was adopted into the Olympian pantheon like a wild-card rookie who partied too hard to be ignored. But if you've ever read about him, you'll know one thing: he was weird. He made people dance till they dropped. He blurred the line between sanity and madness, and his wine could bless you or break you. Looking at that man at the stern, the one who hadn't said a word but felt like thunder on mute, I started to wonder. Was I still in my world, or had I just stepped into his? I was trying to play it cool, sitting on a barrel that smelled like it had been retired from active wine duty a century ago. The others were still laughing, singing, sharing olives, and having very passionate arguments about which island made the best red. I smiled, nodded along, and did my best to not look like I was internally panicking. I mean, I hadn't even planned on getting on a boat today. And yet, here I was, somewhere off the coast, with people who called themselves free sailors, and one mysterious figure who hadn't blinked since I boarded. I kept glancing toward the stern. He hadn't moved, not an inch, his wine jug still steaming gently beside him, like the ocean breeze had decided to leave it alone out of respect. But the rest of the crew? Total chaos. One of them started climbing the mast because someone dared him. Another guy offered to read my future in wine dregs. "You're gonna have a very wet day," he declared after swirling the cup. "Thanks, man." Eventually, I couldn't help myself. I leaned toward the nearest guy. An older sailor with a beard like he'd braided it once 5 years ago and then gave up halfway. "Hey," I whispered, "the guy at the back. Who is he?" The man squinted toward the stern, then shrugged. "Oh, he joined us a few ports ago. Doesn't talk much. Drinks a lot, though." But he paused, as if choosing his words carefully, which, for a guy who just tried to race a seagull, felt out of character. "He's different." "Different how?" "Well, his wine never runs out. And last night, the olives in the barrel started glowing." "Glowing?" He nodded. "Like tiny lanterns. Pretty, but unsettling." I blinked. "And you're okay with that?" Another shrug. "Listen, we've had weirder. Once had a guy who could sneeze and let." He walked away like that explained everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a group of eccentric seafarers. Something felt mythic, like I'd wandered into the backstage of an ancient play and no one had told me what role I was supposed to perform. I looked up. The sky had shifted. The kind of subtle change that makes you squint and think. Wasn't it brighter a minute ago? The sun was still out, but the light felt heavier, denser, and that's when I noticed it. The man at the stern, he'd finally moved. He lifted the jug, not to drink, just to hold it up. The crew went silent, every single one, as if he'd rung an invisible bell that only they could hear. A few of them started bowing, not dramatically, more like respectfully, like they suddenly remembered who he might be. And then he spoke, just one word. I couldn't catch it because the wind stole it halfway, but the tone? It echoed, not in a loud way, more like it reverberated in my chest, the way certain notes from a cello can make your ribs hum. I didn't know what he said, but I felt it, and so did the ship. The sails fluttered, even though the wind hadn't changed. The boards under my feet creaked like they were stretching, and from the gaps between the planks, no kidding, little green shoots began to poke through. I leaned down, tiny vines, with delicate tendrils curling toward the sunlight. I swear I saw a grape start to form. I looked up at the others. No one was panicking. No one was even surprised. They just started singing again. A new tune, slower, harmonized. There's a point where weird stops being weird and becomes sacred. This was that point. I turned to look at him again, and that's when I noticed his eyes. They were gold. Not metaphorically, literally shimmering gold, like molten metal reflecting a sunset. I froze, because that's when it hit me. This wasn't a lucky guest on a wine cruise. This was Dionysus, the god of wine, of ecstasy, of wildness and rebirth. And we'd, oh gods, accidentally picked him up on our ship. Or maybe he picked us. Okay, so let's recap. I'm on a rickety boat with a bunch of drunken wannabe pirates. There are grapevines growing out of the floorboards, and the man sitting silently at the stern, who until 5 minutes ago I thought was just shy, is, in fact, Dionysus. Yeah, that Dionysus. And nobody seems especially alarmed. If anything, they're a little too chill about it. One of the guys casually handed the grapevine a ribbon, like it was a birthday gift. Another was braiding his beard with grape leaves. Me? I was internally screaming, but with a very composed expression because I'm polite like that. Let me be honest, I don't think I fully grasped what it meant to be in the presence of a god. Not until I saw someone trip over a wine jug, fall flat on the deck, and immediately start laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. And then, weirdest of all, I joined in. It wasn't even that funny, but suddenly the whole ship was echoing with this contagious, bubbling laughter that felt like it came from somewhere under the skin. Like joy had cracked open and spilled everywhere. That's Dionysus for you. He's not the god of wind the way, say. Hermes is the god of messages. Dionysus is the kind of god who becomes the party, who turns logic into mist, makes you forget where the beginning and the end are, and then somehow convinces you to dance through the confusion like it's all part of the plan. That's the thing. His worship wasn't like the others. Ancient Greeks built temples for Apollo, sure, but for Dionysus, they built experiences. Theater, dance, wild midnight processions. His followers, often women called maenads, would run into the hills, lose themselves in trance, and return with wild stories and no shoes. There are ancient texts that describe how his rituals blurred lines between man and woman, between sanity and madness, between human and divine. And yes, historians still argue whether all of it was symbolic or if the wine was just that strong. Back on the boat, I finally worked up the courage to get closer to him. Not too close, just enough to observe. I crouched near the edge of the deck, pretending to adjust my sandal. Smooth, I know. He still hadn't spoken again, but something had shifted. The air around him had a weight to it, like the moment right before a thunderstorm, when everything is holding its breath. His eyes weren't golden anymore. They were a deep, rich violet, like crushed berries still dripping. The grapevines now had flowers, actual flowers, on a moving ship. Some of the petals were drifting down like confetti, and when they touched the deck, they vanished in little bursts of sweetness. I smelled honey, cinnamon, and, no joke, a hint of roasted nuts. It was getting unreal. So, of course, I did what any rational person would do when surrounded by potentially divine phenomena. I turned to the nearest sailor and asked, "Hey, when exactly did he get on board?" He scratched his head. "Hard to say. We docked 2 nights ago on Naxos, I think. Or was it Ikaria? Somewhere with goats." He shrugged. He was just there the next morning. Quiet, but he had wine, so we figured he was cool. That's how casually this man explained the literal appearance of a god. Like, "Oh yeah, mysterious stranger with supernatural wine? Must be Thursday." And then he added something that made the hairs on my arm stand up. He said he wanted to go somewhere the sea could listen. No idea what that means, but it sounded poetic, so we didn't argue. Now, let's pause for a moment. Somewhere the sea could listen. That's not normal traveler talk. That's the ocean and I are on texting terms kind of talk. I looked back at Dionysus. He still hadn't moved, but the sea was moving differently now. It was subtle at first, waves that curved just a bit too symmetrically, foam patterns that looked almost like writing. But the longer I stared, the more I felt like the ship wasn't just floating on the sea. It was being carried by it, like the water had decided it liked us. Or him. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I was terrified or honored. Probably both. Because if you think being in the presence of a god is all trumpets and thunder, let me tell you, it's not. It's the soft terror of realizing that reality can bend, and you're still supposed to act casual about it. And right now, reality was bending. I looked around. The others were drinking, laughing, singing. I was starting to wonder if I was the only one who realized that we were sailing into something ancient. Something no sailor's map could predict. You know that feeling when you're in a dream and something finally tips you off, like a floating chair or a cat that talks in Latin. And you think, okay, this isn't normal. That was me on that ship, except I was wide awake. And now, even the wine was starting to behave strangely. I'd pour myself a cup earlier, mostly to blend in, but I hadn't finished it. And I swear to you, the cup was still full. Same amount. I even tilted it just to check. Nothing spilled. Okay, maybe I'm hallucinating. Maybe the sun's too strong. Maybe I've been kidnapped by a traveling improv troupe with access to ancient special effects. But then I saw him pour his wine again. Dionysus, still perfectly composed, as if the chaos around him was background noise, lifted his bronze jug. He didn't tilt it. The wine just flowed straight into the cup below. No glug, no splash. Smooth as silk, as if gravity didn't apply to his beverages. And his cup? Never empty. Not once. I looked around. Nobody else thought this was strange. The crew just kept drinking, even as the vines now reached the masts. A cluster of grapes had somehow formed above one of the sailors, and he was just plucking them casually, like this was fine. Now, I know a little mythology, enough to remember that Dionysus wasn't just the god of wine. He was the god of transformation. His stories are full of things shifting shape, of blurred lines between joy and madness, between order and chaos. But watching happen, that's a whole other flavor of weird. Then came the leopard. Yes, a real leopard. It padded silently onto the deck from where exactly, I have no idea. It didn't jump on board. It didn't leap out of a crate. It was just suddenly there. Sleek, golden-furred, eyes like twin moons, and absolutely unbothered. It brushed past a barrel, stretched luxuriously, and then curled up at Dionysus's feet like it belonged. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. One of the guys even gave a pat on the head. Me? I was still trying to process the sequence. Magical wine, living vines, sudden leopard. Like a Greek god's Pinterest board had come to life. I took a deep breath and tried to center myself. I remembered reading once that Dionysus was often depicted riding in a chariot pulled by leopards. It's symbolic, wildness tamed by divinity. Or maybe divinity is the wildness, just focused. But when you see it live, on a moving boat, it doesn't feel symbolic. It feels like the world has decided to forget its rules for a while. I walked carefully across the deck. The vines shifted slightly as I passed, like they were acknowledging me. No big deal, just sentient plants. Happens all the time. I sat near the mast, tried to look inconspicuous. But my heart was thudding like a drum solo, and my head was spinning with questions. What was I doing here? Why hadn't he said anything more? And, most importantly, what exactly was going to happen next? That's when the wind changed. It wasn't a storm wind. It was gentler than that. But it had presence, like something alive had exhaled across the water. It carried the scent of ripe figs and crushed thyme, and something darker, something ancient. And with it came a sound. Low, almost too low to hear. Maybe, or a vibration, like the sea itself was responding to something invisible. The crew felt it too. You could tell. Their laughter slowed. The songs faded. They looked around, puzzled, like they'd just forgotten what they were supposed to be doing. Dionysus stood up. He didn't announce it. He didn't make a speech. He just rose, smooth and silent, and every eye on the ship turned toward him. The leopard lifted its head, but didn't move. I thought he'd say something, but instead he reached out and touched one of the vines. That's when things really started shifting. The vine curled gently around his fingers, pulsing with life. And then, no exaggeration, it grew. Rapidly, it coiled up the mast, stretched across the rigging, twisted down the side of the boat like it had been waiting centuries to wake up. And the grapes? They began to glow. Not brightly, just a faint, golden shimmer like little suns caught in skins. One of the sailors gasped. Another dropped his cup, but no one moved. We were frozen, not by fear, but by awe. This was the moment I realized something I hadn't before. Dionysus didn't need to speak to change the world. He didn't need thunder or wrath. He just was, and that was enough. The god of wine had stood up, and the ship, the sea, the vines, the very air was paying attention. And so was I. Let me just say, if you've never seen grapevines grow at supernatural speed across a ship while a literal god stands barefoot among barrels and drunkards, you're missing out on a very specific kind of surreal. By the time Dionysus let go of that vine, the entire ship looked like it had been swallowed by a midsummer festival. Leaves tangled in the rigging, grapes dangled from the mast, and somewhere above my head a nightingale. Where did that come from? Started to sing. I don't remember anyone planting these seeds. They just appeared, fully grown, blooming, fruiting. There is something strange about the color of the leaves too. Not just green, but a rich, velvety shade that seemed to change with the sunlight, sometimes flickering purple like wine just before the pour. Someone, possibly the same guy who had tried to race a seagull earlier, declared, "This is fine." And everyone nodded. That's when I gave up trying to understand and just watched. Because this wasn't a trick. This was magic. Old magic. The kind that makes you question if time is real, or if maybe you've just always been here, on this ship, under this spell. The leopard stretched again and wandered slowly past me. It locked eyes with me for half a second, cool, calm, like I was just another curious detail in its lazy afternoon. I held my breath. I didn't blink. I'm not proud of it, but I also didn't move for a solid 10 seconds after it passed. I turned back toward Dionysus. He was barefoot now, stepping lightly over the vines, the wood, the pools of wine collecting where the deck curved just slightly. His robe, which had been simple and white before, now shimmered faintly. Not gold, not silver, something stranger, like the reflection of firelight on dark water. One of the crew raised a flute and began to play, almost involuntarily. The notes were slow, meandering, uncertain at first, then steadier, dreamier. And as the melody drifted across the deck, I swear I saw the grapes on the vine sway. Just a little. just enough to feel alive. Then the laughter started again, soft at first, a chuckle here, a giggle there, but it grew, like something rising from the belly of the ship itself. I couldn't help it. I laughed too, not because anything was funny, but because something had shifted inside me. It was joy, but strange joy, the kind that carries just a drop of madness. You know the feeling, when you're too tired and something tiny feels hilarious, or when you're crying and then suddenly laughing at how dramatic you're being. That's his kind of joy, and that's when I noticed something even weirder. The barrels on the deck, once sealed and weather-stained, were now all open. And inside, not just wine, there were figs, olives, pomegranates, even clusters of dates that looked freshly picked. The whole ship had become some kind of floating garden. One sailor tried to taste a date, then paused and whispered, "It's still warm from the tree." I didn't ask questions anymore, because here's the thing, Dionysus isn't just a god of wine. He's a god of life in all its extremes. Feast and famine, laughter and terror. He doesn't sit quietly in a temple. He erupts in your world, takes your neat little categories and turns them upside down. That's why his myths are so full of contradiction. He's born twice. He dies and returns. He's both a foreigner and one of the Olympians, a gentle youth and a wild, fearsome force. Some scholars still argue over whether he's even a real Greek god or an imported figure absorbed into the pantheon to make room for something wilder. But on this boat, there was no doubt. He was real, and here's what really struck me. He hadn't done anything violent, not a single bolt of divine anger. No fiery declarations, just silence, stillness, and the world changed around him. I thought, this is how gods work, isn't it? Not through control, but through presence. He sat back down, now with a soft smile on his lips. Not smug, not mysterious, just peaceful, like this was exactly how things should be. The vine settled, the flute slowed, the sea rocked the boat like a cradle. And for one suspended, shimmering moment, we all just floated. No one said a word. Even the sea held its breath. There's a particular kind of silence that only happens when the world forgets it's supposed to be loud. That's what we were floating in now. The kind where even the creak of wood sounds deliberate, like the ship is trying not to disturb the moment. The vines had stopped growing, the laughter had quieted, the music had faded into memory, and Dionysus just sat there, calm as ever, as if all of this was just a gentle Tuesday afternoon for him. But for me, my mind was racing. Because here's the question that finally hit me. What now? We had God on board. And not just any God. The asterisk God of unpredictability. The embodiment of don't get too comfortable. The ancient Greeks feared him as much as they adored him. His arrival meant celebration, sure, but also chaos. Transformation. Consequences. And we'd kidnapped him. Kind of. Okay. Kidnapped might be too strong a word. Let's say accidentally offered unauthorized passage. Either way, we had definitely not invited him with proper ceremony. There are no garlands, no offerings, no chorus of flutes. Just a bunch of guys yelling, "Hop on board, stranger," at a divinity who apparently accepted. I started mentally reviewing all the myths I'd ever heard about Dionysus and mortals who crossed him. Spoiler alert, it rarely ended with, "and then they all lived happily ever after." There was the king who banned his cult and ended up driven mad. The sailor who mocked him and turned into a dolphin. The women who danced themselves into such frenzy, they tore someone to pieces thinking he was a lion. It's not that he was cruel, just unignorable, like a cosmic reset button wrapped in ivy and gold. I glanced around the deck. The rest of the crew didn't seem worried. A few were napping. One was trying to teach the leopard how to high-five. Another was lying on his back, whispering to the sky. I got up, slowly, because the deck was still alive with little vines that shifted when you stepped, and walked toward the stern. Toward him. He didn't move, but as I approached, his gaze met mine. Let me tell you, being looked at by a god is not like being looked at by a person. It's not just your eyes that feel it. It's your entire self. Like someone's reading all your internal drafts and laughing at your footnotes. And yet, it wasn't uncomfortable. He wasn't judging me. It was more like he was remembering me, like we'd met before, or like time didn't matter, and we were always somehow meeting for the first and 100th time. "I know you," I almost said, but I didn't, because maybe I didn't need to. Instead, I did something I didn't plan. I sat down across from him, cross-legged, like a student, like a guest. He smiled. That's it, just a small, almost playful smile. And then he reached for his cup. He poured wine into a second one and handed it to me. Now, this should be the moment where I say the wine shimmered or glowed or made the stars flicker. But it didn't. It just smelled really, really good. Like summer fruit, warm earth, wild herbs. Like everything good in the world, distilled and handed to you with no explanation. I took a sip. It wasn't like getting drunk. It was like remembering something I didn't know I'd forgotten. A sweetness behind my teeth, a warmth in my chest, a soft hum in my ears. And then I realized something. He wasn't angry. He wasn't here for vengeance. He was just being. Somehow, I had expected some great declaration, a dramatic show of divine displeasure. But Dionysus didn't work like that. He didn't need to punish you to remind you he was a god. He just needed to exist and let the world shift around him. And shift it did. The sails had changed color, rich, plum purple now, rippling in the wind like royal banners. The air was thick with the smell of fermenting fruit and salt and sun. And somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard faint drums. But maybe they were just my heartbeat. I looked at him again. He was watching the horizon now, eyes soft, like someone remembering a song they used to love. And that's when I understood. He hadn't chosen this boat by accident. He was going somewhere. And somehow, we'd been pulled into the path of that journey. Wherever we were headed next, it wasn't random. And it wasn't going to be quiet. I was still sitting across from him, the wine cup cooling in my hands. When it hit me, this was the calm before whatever it was. You know that feeling when everything gets too quiet and you just know the plot is about a twist? That. Dionysus leaned back slightly, gaze still fixed on the horizon, as if he could see something none of us could. And maybe he could. He was, after all, a god who'd always stood a bit outside the timeline. Someone who'd died and come back, who was born twice, and possibly in two different places. And yes, I said born twice. That's not a metaphor. It's a full-blown mythological paradox. See, some say he was born to Semele, a mortal woman after a rather steamy incident with Zeus. But then Semele was vaporized because, well, being a mortal and asking to see Zeus's true form is usually a bad idea. And the unborn Dionysus was stitched into Zeus's thigh until he was ready to be born again. Hence the nickname, the twice-born god. Other stories? They say he didn't come from Greece at all, that he wandered in from the east, possibly Asia Minor or even farther, that he brought the vine with him, literally introduced wine culture to the Greeks. To them, he was exotic, different, and unsettling. Some scholars suggest Dionysus was a kind of mythological import, a divine guest star absorbed into the main cast of Olympians. Others argue he was there all along, just waiting to take center stage when people were ready to embrace chaos dressed in ivy. Academic debates aside, the guy sitting across from me now looked very comfortable being both familiar and unknowable, like he could recite your full childhood memories and forget your name in the same moment. And somehow both would be true. I glanced at the rest of the crew, still blissfully unaware. One was trying to juggle pomegranates. Another had fallen asleep in a hammock that I swear wasn't there 5 minutes ago. A third was sketching little grape leaves on the deck with wine-soaked fingertips. There's something almost alarming about how quickly humans normalize the impossible. Vines? Sure. Leopards? Fine. A god offering you wine? Tuesday. But deep down, a part of me kept whispering, this doesn't last. Not because it was too good, but because it was too still. Dionysus wasn't the god of peace. He was the god of momentum, of shift, of tipping points. He was a god who moved things, in people, in landscapes, in reality. And sure enough, the wind shifted again. Only this time, it wasn't just a breeze. It was a direction. The sails caught suddenly, full and purposeful. The ship, which had been lazily drifting, now cut forward through the water like it knew where it was going. No one adjusted the helm. No one called out a course. It just moved. I looked at Dionysus. He didn't give a command. He didn't blink. But there was the tiniest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That half-knowing, half-teasing expression of someone who already knows how the story ends but isn't telling. And I got it. We were going somewhere specific. This wasn't a pleasure cruise anymore. This was part of his story. Or maybe he'd become part of ours. Then, just as I was starting to piece it together, another sailor leaned over and said, "So, you think he's that Dionysus?" I blinked. What? The god. The real one. Not just some magician who's good with vines and silence. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "You seriously think this could not be him?" He shrugged. Could be. Could be some really committed actor. We once sailed with a guy who could burp in perfect hexameter. I stared at him. This man just summoned a leopard and made the grapes glow. The sailor nodded slowly. Yeah, fair. But still, the real Dionysus? He looked doubtful, like that label made things too real. And I realized something strange. Even now, even here, we struggle to believe in gods. We want them to stay as metaphors, symbols, lessons with sandals. Because once we accept they're real, then everything else gets wobbly too. Morality, identity, mortality, all the solid bricks start floating. Maybe that's why Dionysus isn't the most popular god among the tidy temple crowd. He doesn't play by the clean rules. He doesn't stay in his lane. He blurs everything. But maybe that's the point. He doesn't want you to bow. He wants you to change. And whether you do that by dancing, laughing, weeping, or turning into a dolphin, well, that's between you and the sea. So, the ship's sailing itself now. Nobody's steering. No one's even pretending to steer. The wheel just spins lazily when the wind shifts, like it knows its job is symbolic at best. The sail's full. The sea is calm. And we're cruising toward something. A distant shape, maybe, or maybe just the next beat in Dionysus's rhythm. He hasn't moved again. Not much, anyway. He tilts his cup from time to time, sips with the elegance of someone who knows exactly how long an eternal moment lasts. The vines have stopped growing, but they've settled into the ship like they belong. Like we're now half vineyard, half vessel. And I can't help but notice the shift in the air. It's hard to describe. It's not colder, not warmer. Just charged, like when you're standing in the dark and you know someone else is there. The breeze tastes like salt and thyme, and something a little metallic like lightning before it lands. Everyone else? Still in the Dionysian haze. Laughing softly, lounging in hammocks. I counted 3 now, sipping from endless cups. It's not a drunken kind of chaos anymore. It's dreamy, quiet, like they're stuck halfway between waking and sleep. Except me. I'm the only one wide awake and slowly panicking. Because the silence, the peace, is starting to feel intentional. Not natural, but placed. Like the way music sometimes cuts just before the drop. I inch my way up toward the prow. The sea is too calm. The sky too still. And that's when it begins. First, a sound. A sort of groan from the wood beneath us. Long and slow. Like the ship itself is stretching or maybe holding its breath. Then, the sails flutter once and the air thickens. Like fog without the fog. The water darkens. Not stormy, just heavy. And then I see the first ripple. Out past the edge of the ship, a strange wave rolls by. Not crashing, not frothy. Just a smooth arc, rising and falling like something under it moved. I squint. Something did move. There, just below the surface. A shadow. Long, sleek. Fast. I turn to say something. Maybe a warning? Maybe just a frantic, "Hey, did anyone else see that?" But the moment I open my mouth, the ship lurches. Not violently. Just enough to make all the wine cups sway. And now everyone looks up. "What was that?" someone whispers. "Fish." Another offers, hopefully. "Nope." Another ripple. Closer. Bigger. And then splash. A clean, silvery arc bursts from the water. Something leaps, leaps, out of the sea. Graceful, powerful, and fast. A dolphin. Maybe 2. No more. A whole pod. They circle the ship once, their backs gleaming in the twilight. And something about the way they move, synchronized, precise, almost theatrical, makes my skin prickle. Because here's the thing, these aren't just dolphins. Not normal ones, anyway. They're too perfect, Too aware. One of them actually looks at me as it jumps. I'm not kidding. It turns midair, meets my eyes, and suddenly I feel something shift in my chest. That wasn't a dolphin. That was a man, or someone who used to be. I stumble back, breath caught, and turn toward Dionysus. He's watching too, not surprised, not smiling, just watching, like this was part of the show all along. And now I realize I've read about this. This story, the pirates, the god, the transformation, the tale where a band of sailors tried to kidnap Dionysus, didn't know who he was, and, as punishment, he turned them into dolphins. They jumped ship in panic. He let them live, but not as men, as sea creatures forever tied to the ocean, still playful, still moving, but changed. And the way those dolphins are circling us now, it's not random. It's recognition. They know him. One swims beside the ship for a long moment. Not jumping, not darting, just gliding, almost like an escort. It gets close enough for me to see a small, almost spiral-shaped mark near its dorsal fin, like a scar, or maybe something older. A tattoo that survived the transformation? Can that even happen? But I don't ask, because deep down, I already know the answer. Yes, with Dionysus, anything can happen. And the scary part? It doesn't even feel wrong. I'm no longer afraid, just hushed, because this isn't punishment, not exactly. It's poetry. It's justice in myth form. Symbolic, beautiful, irreversible. He didn't destroy them. He rewrote them. And now they swim, laughing in bubbles, dancing through waves, like living metaphors. And me? I'm still on the ship, still human, at least for now. I'm not sure how long I stood there, gripping the edge of the ship, watching those dolphins glide through the water. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been a century. Time was slippery now, like everything else. They moved so gracefully. It wasn't the splashy, chaotic movement you see when dolphins chase fish or show off for tourists. No, this was something slower, deeper, almost like a ritual. They swam in wide, deliberate arcs around the ship, sometimes jumping, sometimes diving just long enough to make you think they'd gone, then appearing again as if they were playing with the rhythm of your breath. They weren't leaving us. They were staying. And that, somehow, felt more intense than if they had vanished into the deep. I turned around and, of course, found Dionysus right behind me. No footsteps, no sound, just there. He was barefoot, as usual, and now the grapes in his hair had darkened to near black, like the kind that grow best in volcanic soil. The robe shimmered in the low light, catching hints of seafoam green and storm cloud gray. He looked at the dolphins. He looked at me. Then, without a word, he lifted one hand. A slow gesture. Not a wave, not a command. More like a permission slip, a blessing, a farewell, or maybe just a moment of acknowledgement, like when two old friends pass each other in a crowd and exchange a glance that says everything. And with that, the dolphins shifted formation. They grouped into a spiral. I swear, a literal spiral. Spinning once, twice, then scattered, diving deeper into the ocean in 2s and 3s. Gone. Not forever, I sensed. Just for now. Dionysus turned and walked back toward the center of the ship. The moment he passed me, I felt something lift, like the pressure that had been building in the air evaporated in his wake. I exhaled. Didn't even know I'd been holding my breath. Someone behind me muttered, "Okay, what just happened?" Another whispered, "Were those dolphins?" Or, no one finished their sentences. We all knew, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. There's a kind of reverence that doesn't need language. The ship settled back into a gentle sway. The vines creaked faintly in the breeze. The scent of wine and salt still hung in the air, but now it carried something else, something wild. Not chaotic, not threatening, just untamed, like the world had been politely reminded of its older instincts. I wandered back toward the others. Someone had started playing the flute again, soft and hesitant, like asking permission with each note. The melody echoed across the deck, and for a moment I wondered if the dolphins could still hear it, far below. I sat down on a coil of rope, still damp with seawater and who knows what else, and stared at the sky. The clouds were gathering now, lazily, like guests arriving late to a strange party. And I thought, asterisk, what just happened wasn't a story. It was a statement, asterisk. You know how myths often sound dramatic and loud? Thunder, vengeance, fire? Dionysus didn't need any of that. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't summon a tidal wave. He just existed, and the world adjusted accordingly. That's the scariest kind of power, isn't it? The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. No speeches, no bolts from the sky, just a man, calm, wine-scented, soft-eyed, and a boat full of mortals who briefly crossed the border between the real and the more than real. And here's the part that really gets me. He didn't punish those sailors by destroying them. He didn't throw them overboard. Didn't summon sea monsters. He transformed them, turned them into creatures of grace, of motion, of song. And yeah, okay, maybe they tried to kidnap a god. That's bad. But he gave them something else in return, a new form, a new freedom, a way to move forward, even if it wasn't what they planned. It wasn't revenge. It was mercy, or maybe irony, or maybe both. Dionysus is like that. He never fits in one box. He's always wine and madness, joy and fear, celebration and consequence. He'll throw a festival and in the same breath turn your worldview upside down. And as the wind picked up and the sails shifted again, I knew deep in my bones. This wasn't over. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of the prologue. By now, I've stopped trying to guess what's going to happen next. You'd think that after the vines, the leopard, and the part where an entire pod of dolphins turn out to be ex-sailors, I'd have reached my quota for weird maritime miracles. But no, the thing about sailing with a god, asterisk this asterisk god, is that the story doesn't unfold. It transforms, like everything else he touches. The sun had begun to dip now, melting into the sea like gold into ink. The ship cut forward smoothly, its destination still unnamed, its course completely uncharted, but somehow undeniably intentional. I was sitting near the prow again, legs dangling over the edge, trying to make peace with the fact that my feet were now about 2 questionable choices away from turning into fins. I glanced over my shoulder. Dionysus was sitting cross-legged in the center of the ship, vines twined gently around him like curious pets. His eyes were half closed, not asleep, just somewhere else. The others were in varying stages of understanding. One guy kept mumbling. I could have sworn I saw my reflection wave at me. Another was making a daisy chain out of grape leaves. A third was building a tower of fruit and humming what I can only describe as a ballad for oranges. But here's the thing that finally struck me. No one asked to leave. Not one person. Even after seeing men turned into dolphins and watching wine pour itself and vines bloom mid-ocean, no one tried to jump ship. Not out of fear. Not even out of sanity. It was like we all agreed, consciously or not, that this was no longer our ship. It was his, and we were just along for the ride. I think that's part of the Dionysian magic, honestly. He doesn't take control the way a king or general might. He just tilts reality just a little until you lean with it without noticing. And then, without warning, someone screamed. Not a terror scream, more like a what is happening scream, which, honestly, was overdue. I jumped up, scanning the deck. One of the sailors was standing near the mast, pointing straight down at his legs. "Look," he shouted wide-eyed. "Look at my feet." Everyone froze. And there it was. Not full transformation. Not yet, but change. His legs were shifting. Slowly, the lines of his knees blurred, the skin slickening, smoothing, flattening into something more fluid than flesh. His feet were fusing. Not melting exactly, just forgetting how to be feet. Someone dropped their wine cup. The man didn't seem in pain. In fact, he was oddly serene about the whole thing, like someone watching his clothes turn into water. I feel light," he said, blinking slowly, like I'm breathing through my bones. No one knew what to do. And Dionysus? Still sitting, still silent. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked thoughtful, like a sculptor watching his work begin to take shape on its own. I stepped forward. "Are you okay?" I asked the man, whose name, now that I think of it, I never learned. He turned to me with a faint, almost childlike smile. "I think I know where I'm going now," he said. "I thought I was lost, but I was just waiting." And then, without hesitation, he leaned backward and let himself fall over the edge. A splash. Silence. We rushed to the side of the boat, peering over. There was a moment, a breath, a stillness. Then movement. A sleek figure darted below the surface, curving, rising, and leaping. A dolphin. Another one. The same spiral-shaped mark near its fin. The same gentleness in its glide. I felt the ship shudder, not from waves, but from the emotion of the moment. Like the wood itself had felt it. And one by one, the crew turned to look at Dionysus. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. This was the moment we all understood. This was not random. He was choosing, or maybe we were. Something about the man who jumped, how calm he was, how ready, made me realize this wasn't punishment. It wasn't a curse. It was an invitation to change, to let go, to become something else. And some part of me, quiet and deep, wondered if I, too, would be offered that choice. And if I was, would I take it? I didn't sleep that night. Not for lack of trying. The ship had gone strangely quiet, almost cradling us in calm. But my mind was too loud. I lay curled up near the prow, head resting on a coiled rope that smelled faintly of thyme and sea brine, watching stars blink slowly in a place above the mast. The sea was glass, the kind of still that doesn't feel natural. And every now and then, I'd hear it again, the distant, airy splash of something rising from the water, then diving back under with the ease of someone who no longer needed to think about breathing. Another dolphin, or another former sailor. By now, I'd lost count. It wasn't happening all at once, but gradually. One by one, the crew was changing. Not dramatically, not in agony, just subtly, shapes blurring, voices fading, eyes softening as if someone had pulled the world gently out of focus. They didn't panic. That's the strangest part. I'd spent my whole life thinking transformation meant screaming. That change was sharp, loud, maybe even violent. But this was like slipping into warm water. It was kind. Unnerving, yes, but kind. And tonight, the stars above felt like an audience. Silent, patient, watching it all with the familiarity of someone who's seen this performance before. Eventually, I sat up. Couldn't take lying still anymore. I wandered toward the center of the ship, where Dionysus sat, as always, calm and radiant, like time bowed in his presence. He opened one eye as I approached, just barely. I didn't speak. I just sat beside him, not too close, enough to feel the warmth, the hum. He smelled like crushed mint, wild honey, and something deeper, earth after rain. For a while, we didn't say anything, which was fine. He wasn't the kind of god who needed small talk. Then he handed me a grape. One grape, deep violet, almost black, and that's when I saw it, reflected in its skin. A dolphin, mid-leap, arcing in slow motion. Not a real reflection, more like a memory, a possibility. You let them choose, I said, more to the grape than to him. He didn't nod, didn't confirm, but the silence was loud with agreement. You don't force them, you just offer. Still nothing. But I got it, because that's what Dionysus does. He doesn't give commands. He gives doors. Strange, vine-wrapped doors with golden handles that only appear when you're too tired or too curious to resist opening them. And if you walk through, you don't come back the same. You might not come back at all. There's a term I remember from mythology class, asterisk liminality star. The in-between, the threshold, that moment of standing on the edge of what you were just before stepping into what you're about to become. That's him. That's what he embodies. Not the party. The pause before the party begins. Not the madness. The moment you realize you're about to lose control, and don't mind. And on this ship, adrift on a sea that no longer felt fully like water, I understood something I'd never quite grasped reading his myths in dusty books. He is not a god of chaos. He's a god of surrender. The dolphins leapt again in the distance. Slower now, more rhythmic. A pattern, a ritual. It felt holy. One of the crew had gone quiet beside me, his legs stretched out, bare feet resting on the deck. And I noticed they were different. His toes no longer distinct, the curve of his ankles starting to smooth. He saw me looking and smiled gently. I dreamed of a sea last night, he whispered. But it wasn't the sea. It was breath. It was singing. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. And then Dionysus stood. It was the first time I'd seen him rise without it being part of something. This time, it wasn't to grow vines or summon leopards or silently unnerve us. This time, he just stretched, like a man waking from a very long nap. And then he looked straight at me. His eyes were not gold this time. They were black, endless, like the night sky when there's no moon, and you realize how much darkness there really is above us. He walked to the edge of the ship and extended a hand toward the water. A dolphin approached. Slow, steady. It lifted its head above the surface. And for a split second, I could see him, the man inside. Not visually, but in the shape of his movement, the tilt of his eye, the way he lingered. He recognized Dionysus, and Dionysus recognized him. And in that exchange, something passed between them. Not a word, not a message, just an understanding. Then the dolphin dove. Gone again. But this time, the water didn't close completely. It shimmered, just for a moment, like a window. And in the stillness, I thought, what if we're all waiting to be rewritten? Not erased, not punished, just translated into something freer, something fluid. And what if all it takes is a cup of wine, a quiet smile, and the arrival of a god who doesn't demand you worship him, only that you notice? The strangest part of all this, I hadn't thought about going home. Not once. Not during the vines. Not during the leopard. Not even when the crew started turning into sea creatures like it was the most natural evolution in the world. It just didn't occur to me. And that realization, once it hit, gave me a jolt bigger than the dolphins did. Because I'm not that spontaneous. I don't go with the flow. I'm the person who plans snack breaks in museum visits. I once made a spreadsheet for my cousin's road trip playlist. Spontaneity is not in my toolkit. And yet, here I was days or hours into a divine voyage, not even wondering where my sandals were, let alone how to get back to shore. I think that's what Dionysus does to people. Not by hypnosis, not by illusion, but by gently unhooking you from the parts of yourself that grip too tightly. And when you stop gripping, you start floating. Sometimes literally. This morning, if you could call it morning in a place where the light no longer obeyed any clock, I watched two more sailors slip into the water. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't announce anything. They just stood at the stern, breathing in something none of us could smell, and then stepped. No splash, just a soft entry, like the sea had opened its arms to take them back. They were dolphins before they hit the second wave. I watched one of them surface, roll onto its side, and look back, just briefly, before disappearing below. And I didn't feel fear or grief. I felt understanding, because it wasn't death. It wasn't even a loss. It was movement, like a breath finally being exhaled after years of being held in. I looked over at Dionysus. He was standing again, robes loose, hair tangled with grapevines now, so thick they formed a kind of crown. He looked less human by the hour, and yet more present than anyone I've ever known. I finally asked him something, not loudly, not directly, just why me? He didn't answer, at least not in words. But he looked at me, and in that look, there were centuries. It was like he was saying, asterisk, you were here because you were ready. Even if you didn't know it, asterisk. And maybe I didn't. But now, sitting on a bench that had sprouted fig leaves, listening to music no one was playing, watching dolphins circle us like orbiting moons, I was starting to believe him. I remembered something I'd read in a book once, that in ancient Greece, Dionysus was both feared and adored because he represented everything people tried to keep out. Madness, ecstasy, wildness, grief, freedom. He was the god you invited into town once a year to turn the world upside down, and then beg politely to leave before things got too real. Because once Dionysus visits you, really visits, you can't go back to the way things were. Not entirely. He leaves fingerprints on your perception. Makes you hear music in silence, see vines in the cracks of stone, feel joy in sadness, and sadness in joy. He doesn't destroy your world. He just changes the filters. There's a story, one I hadn't thought about in years, about how Dionysus once walked into a city as a stranger, completely unrecognized. He was mocked, underestimated, even imprisoned. But he didn't get angry. He just waited, and when the time was right, He unraveled their minds like thread, not out of cruelty, just as a reminder of who he was and who they were forgetting to be. Maybe that's what was happening here. This wasn't just a voyage, it was a mirror, and each of us had to decide what to do when we saw ourselves clearly, unfiltered for the first time. Some dove, some stayed, and me? I was still sitting in the middle, holding both realities like twin coins in each hand. One stamped with my old name, the other with something I hadn't learned to pronounce yet. Dionysus turned away, walking toward the bow. I followed. The horizon had shifted again. Land? Maybe. A cloud bank? Possibly. But deep in my bones, I knew. This journey wasn't about distance. It was about depth, and I had never felt so far from shore. By now, the ship doesn't feel like a ship anymore. I mean, technically we're still floating. There's wood beneath my feet, ropes in the rigging, sails above, but everything feels softer, looser, like the boundaries between boat and vineyard and dream have started to smudge together, and no one's rushing to redraw them. I no longer know what day it is, or if days still exist here. The sun rises, sort of, then it melts sideways. The stars appear in strange patterns, constellations I don't recognize, and some of them blink back when I stare too long. But I'm not scared. Not anymore. I think part of that is him, Dionysus. He doesn't demand calm. He just brings it, like a tide that smooths the edges of everything it touches. The longer I stay in his presence, the less I need explanations, or plans, or names for things. And maybe that's the point. I mean, how do you name something that doesn't want to be named? That's the paradox of Dionysus. He's a god with 1,000 masks. To some, he's a wanderer. To others, a child of Zeus. To others still, a mystery cult wrapped in theater and poetry. Even in his own myths, he shape-shifts, sometimes gentle, sometimes vengeful, sometimes heartbreakingly tender. One myth says he was raised in secret, hidden away from Hera's wrath. Another claims he traveled far east, spreading vine cuttings and winemaking to lands that had never tasted fermentation. And here's where the scholars get sweaty. No one agrees where he actually came from. Asia Minor? Thrace? Egypt? Some even suggest India. They debate whether he was originally a fertility god, a vegetation spirit, or the embodiment of ecstasy and the subconscious. One historian I once read described Dionysus as a divine echo of humanity's need to lose control on purpose. I didn't understand that back then. I do now, because I think that's what he offers. Not just wine and laughter and blurry nights, but a break from the rigidity of logic, from pretending we have it all figured out. He opens a door into the wild part of you, the part that dances when no one's watching, that cries in the middle of joy, that sings badly on rooftops, that remembers something ancient when firelight hits your face just right, the part you usually keep hidden. Here, you don't have to. The remaining few of us on the ship, those of us who haven't yet changed, we've stopped talking about what's happening. The language doesn't fit anymore. Instead, we tell stories. Half-true ones. Out-of-order memories. One guy keeps reciting poetry to a lantern. Another hums lullabies in a language no one recognizes. Not even him. I caught myself yesterday telling a fig the story of my first heartbreak. It felt right. There's no judgment here. Dionysus doesn't judge. He just watches, listens, offers the wine. And when you're ready, you drink. One man did last night. Quietly. No ceremony. Just sat with Dionysus for a while. Then stepped off the boat as if the sea were a garden path. I saw him resurface seconds later. Sleek, smooth, a dolphin now, tail breaking the water like a punctuation mark. No pain. No scream. Just grace. And I still haven't decided what I'll do. Part of me wants to dive. To let go. To become part of the rhythm instead of the observer. But another part still clings. To words. To memory. To shape. Maybe that's why I'm still here. Maybe Dionysus is waiting for me to decide. And he will. He's patient. He's the god of the long game. The slow spiral. The transformation that doesn't push you, but calls you. You can answer. Or not. But either way, he stays with you. Even if you return to your old life, to clocks and shoes and small talk, you'll remember. The taste of the wine. The glow of the grapes. The silence of the ship when the world bent inward. And you'll never quite be the same. I wonder now, maybe that's why dolphins are so playful. Maybe that joy is ancient. Not animal instinct, but memory. Maybe they remember the ship too. Maybe some part of them still sings the sea songs we've forgotten how to hear. And maybe I will too, one day. I spent the next morning, or what I guessed was morning, watching the dolphins. They were still with us. They didn't circle the boat constantly anymore, just appeared and disappeared like stars through clouds. Sometimes one would swim close enough that I could see the shimmer of light across its back, the curve of motion that looked too elegant, too precise to be random. One of them did a slow roll along the surface, belly up to the sky, then sank beneath the water like a sigh. I wondered if that one had been the sailor who used to carve little boats out of fruit rinds, or the one who never spoke, just nodded when he laughed. I wonder if they remembered us, or if the remembering was the transformation. The deck was mostly quiet now. Just me, another guy who was sketching endless spirals into the planks with his finger, and Dionysus, leaning against the mast, arms crossed, head tilted, watching the sea like he was expecting someone. I didn't know how to talk to him anymore. Not because I was scared, but because it felt like trying to talk to a thunderstorm. Or to music. There are things you experience, not explain. But I had questions. Not ones with answers, just the kind that sit heavy on your chest if you don't speak them out loud. So I stood. I walked over to him, slowly, like approaching something holy. Or wild. Or both. And I asked, what happens after this? He turned his head, and this time, he actually spoke Star. His voice was soft, like velvet dipped in wind. The kind of voice you don't really hear, so much as feel somewhere in your ribs. After what? I blinked. After the dolphins. After the transformation. After the story. He smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't pitying. It was amused. Like someone who's been asked this question by thousands of souls, each believing they were the first to think of it. There is no after, he said. Only through. Only through. That was it. But it landed in me like a stone in deep water. Because I realized he wasn't talking about dolphins. Or wine. Or boats. He was talking about change. About grief. About ecstasy. About everything we try to skip over so we can reach the ending. He was telling me, gently, that there isn't a clean after. There's only what you go through. And what it makes of you. The man tracing spirals on the deck stopped and looked up. He was halfway gone, I think. His skin had taken on that faint shimmer I now recognized. He smiled at me. Not a goodbye, more like a you'll see, and stood. He walked to the edge of the ship. I didn't stop him. I watched him go, and I swear, just as he dove, the spiral he had drawn on the deck lit up, faintly like breath on glass, then vanished. Dionysus closed his eyes. I sat beside him. For a long time, we didn't speak, just listened to the sea. Eventually, I said, there are only 3 of us left. He nodded, until there aren't. The third one was at the stern now, leaning against the railing, silent. He was already half myth, I could feel it. And me? Still here, still holding on to his shape, but not as tightly as before. I started thinking about the version of me that boarded this ship. The one who squinted at strangers, who clung to logic, who always wanted the plot before the punchline. That version had been quiet lately, less stubborn, less loud in my head. I didn't know if that meant I was changing too, but I knew I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Because here's the truth. Dionysus doesn't take away who you are. He shows you what you could be if you let go. Not to erase you, but to free you, to unburden you of all the rules you didn't write, but still obey. He is not the god of endings. He's the god of release. The one who knows that sometimes, to find yourself, you have to lose your shape, your name, your grip on certainty, and maybe even your feet. We reached land at sunrise, or what I thought was land, a stretch of soft, golden sand extended like a ribbon out from the mist. No cliffs, no harbor, no crowd shouting welcome home. Just beach, still and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for you to speak first. The ship slowed on its own. No one dropped anchor. It just drifted in until the hull whispered against the shallows, and then it stopped moving. That was it. No fanfare, no divine decree. Just here we are. I stood near the railing and looked out. My feet still felt like mine, though I wasn't entirely sure anymore what that meant. Behind me, the ship creaked gently, as if exhaling. Above, the sails flapped once, then fell still. And Dionysus? Gone. Just like that. No farewell. No cryptic exit line. No burst of golden light. He wasn't on the deck. Not in the shadows. Not perched dramatically on the mast like a farewell phoenix. He was just no longer there. But I knew he had been, and that was enough. Only one other sailor remained beside me. We didn't talk. We didn't have to. His eyes were still human, but his breath sounded like waves when he exhaled. He looked at the beach, then at me, then stepped off the ship without a word. Not into the water, onto the sand. He walked a few paces barefoot and then paused. Looked back, smiled. That kind of smile that says, "You'll understand later." I watched him shrink in the distance until the haze swallowed him up. Maybe he was walking to a new life. Maybe the sand would open beneath him and reveal another transformation. I didn't follow. Not yet. I looked down at my hands. Still mine. Still skin and bone. But softer. Warmer. Like the vines had passed through me without leaving marks. But something inside had rearranged all the same. I sat at the edge of the deck. Legs swinging. Salt on my lips. And I started laughing. Not hysterically. Just softly. The kind of laugh that bubbles up when you realize you survived something you didn't even know you were afraid of. I'd shared a ship with a god, watched men turn into dolphins, held myth like it was a cup of wine. And now I was here, back at the edge of the world, or maybe at the beginning of it. I slipped down onto the sand. It was warm, silky, real. The sea behind me murmured one last time, then faded into its own rhythm. The ship was still there, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I had borrowed it like a book from a library that doesn't keep records. I walked inland, just a few steps. The air smelled like grapes and thyme and fig leaves and sunlight. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't need to, because I had already arrived. And now here you are too, curled under blankets, or lying still with the fan humming quietly, eyes soft and heavy. You've traveled far tonight, not in miles, but in myth. Maybe you came aboard this little story looking for something gentle to fall asleep to. Or maybe, deep down, you needed permission to let go of something you didn't realize you were holding too tightly. That's what Dionysus offers. Not a lesson, not a rule, just a question whispered into your dreams. What would you become if you stopped trying to stay the same? And no, you're not a sailor. You won't wake up with fins. But maybe tomorrow, you'll feel the sea a little closer. Maybe you'll notice a wildness in your own heart. Maybe you'll laugh at something that isn't funny, just because it feels good. And maybe, just maybe, you'll carry a piece of this strange, beautiful voyage with you, like a grapevine curling quietly around the corners of your thoughts. So now, breathe deep. Let the world blur for a little while. You made it ashore, and the story is sleeping too.